Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm your host, Jeffrey, and subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. Now, the Las Vegas Bowl is going to be happening between the Oregon State Beavers and the Florida Gators. Who do I think is going to win this game? Let's break it down. Now, Oregon State is 9-3 and 6-3 this season in the Pac-12, and Jonathan Smith is a fantastic head coach. He's had Oregon State playing better and better football every single year that he's been the head coach, and they've had a great season this year. And in Week 1, they beat Boise State 34-17, and that was a good win. Then they won at Fresno State 35-32. Then they beat Montana State 68-28. Then they lost a heartbreaker to USC at home 17-14. Then they lost at Utah 42-16. That was their worst performance of the season. Then they beat Stanford on the road 28-27. Then they beat Washington State at home 24-10. Then they beat Colorado 42-9. Then they lost at Washington 24-21. That's not a bad loss there at all. Then they beat California 38-10. Then they won at Arizona State 31-7. And then they beat their rivals Oregon 38-34, and that was a fantastic win for Oregon State because they came back and won after being down by 3 scores. And Oregon State again has had a fantastic season. And quarterback Bengal Branson's 109 of 176 for 1,290 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions for Oregon State this year. And he's had a solid season. Chance Nolan's played as well, but he's in the transfer portal. So Bengal Branson will be the starting quarterback in the bowl game. And again, he's had a pretty good season for Oregon State. He's not a very explosive quarterback, not a lot of deep balls, but he is a capable quarterback. And if he can keep the turnovers low, it'll definitely help Oregon State win this bowl game. Running back Damian Martinez had 158 attempts for 970 yards and 7 touchdowns. He's a really good running back for Oregon State. He did get hurt at the end of the regular season, but he will be playing in this bowl game. And Oregon State has other good running backs as well. And wide receiver Trayshawn Harrison had 52 receptions for 604 yards and 4 touchdowns. Oregon State has solid offensive players, and they've played well on offense all season. And on the defensive side of the ball, linebacker Omar Spates had 77 total tackles and 38 solo tackles. Defensive back Keaton Oladapo had 75 total tackles and 46 solo tackles. And defensive back Kyrie Fisher-Morris had 66 total tackles and 32 solo tackles and an interception. And Oregon State's defense has played well in a lot of games this season. They've had a few games where they did give up a lot of points, but for the most part, their defense has been solid all season. And Oregon State's been really good on both sides of the ball. Now, on the Florida side, they are 6-6 and 3-5 in the SEC this season. And Billy Napier's first season as head coach, he's done a decent job at Florida, but he has struggled to find consistency this season with Florida. They've had an up-and-down season, but they haven't had a terrible season. And in Week 1, they beat Utah 29-26, and that was their best win of the season. And then they lost to Kentucky at home 26-16. Then they barely beat South Florida 31-28 at home. Then they lost at Tennessee 38-33, heartbreaking loss there to their rivals. They beat Eastern Washington 52-17. Then they beat Missouri 24-17. Then they lost at home to LSU 45-35. Then they lost at Georgia 42-20. Then they won at Texas A&M 41-24. Then they beat South Carolina 38-6. That was a good one as well. Then they lost at Vanderbilt 31-24. Then they lost at their rivals Florida State 45-38, and that was a tough loss. And again, Florida's been up and down all season. They've had good games this season, but they've also had some games where they didn't play too well either. And quarterback Anthony Richardson has opted out of this bowl game. He is going to declare for the draft. He will not play. And quarterback Jack Miller, the transfer from Ohio State, who's only played in the spring game for Florida, he will be playing in this bowl game. And it's going to be very interesting to see how well he plays, to see if Florida will have a chance to win this game. Running back Montrell Johnson had 144 attempts for 827 yards and 10 touchdowns. And running back Trevor Etienne has 110 attempts for 705 yards and 6 touchdowns. Both are great running backs for Florida, and neither of them have opted out as far as we know. On the receiving core, Ricky Pearsall at wide receiver for Florida had 29 receptions for 596 yards and 5 touchdowns. He's a really solid wide receiver. And wide receiver Xavier Henderson has 38 receptions for 410 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's hurt, but he should be able to play in this bowl game. Florida's had a pretty good offense this season, but they're going to be missing a lot of players on offense in this bowl game. It's going to be very tough for them to replicate the success they've had this season. And on the defensive side of the ball, safety Trey Dean III has 77 total tackles and 44 solo tackles and 2 forced fumbles. And linebacker Amari Burney has 71 total tackles and 38 solo tackles and 2 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles and a fumble recovery. Florida's had a pretty good season on defense as well, but they also have opt-outs on the defensive side of the ball, so it's going to be very tough for the backups to have the same success as a lot of the starters have had for Florida this season. So who do I think is going to win this bowl game? This is a very interesting game because if Florida did not have all their opt-outs and all their players in the transfer portal, then they'd have a much better chance to win this game. But unfortunately for Florida, they have a lot more opt-outs and transfer portal players than Oregon State. Oregon State only has 4, and Florida has over 20 players that are not playing in this game that are either in the portal or opting out for the draft, and many of them are starters, and I don't know if that's going to be enough to overcome. I think that Florida, obviously, they still have a lot of talent on the backups, and there are some starters that are still playing, including the running backs for now, that haven't opted out, and they have a few defensive players that are playing as well. I think Florida still has a really talented team, and I think that they still can win this game. But Oregon State has had the fire all season. Oregon State with Jonathan Smith, they want to be in this bowl game. That's why hardly any players are opting out. There's only one opt-out. The others are transfer portal players. Oregon State wants to be here. They want to play in the Las Vegas Bowl. Florida, I'm not saying that they don't, but they have a lot of players that are looking forward to the NFL draft, or they're wanting to transfer and start somewhere new. I don't know if Florida's going to be able to make up for all the losses that they have in this game. I'm going to go with Oregon State to beat Florida 31-24 in the Las Vegas Bowl. I think Florida can still win this game. I think Billy Napier is going to try to get his team ready for this game, the players that he has left. I think they're really going to try hard. I think a lot of these players are going to want to shine so they can be starters on next year's team for Florida. But Oregon State wants to be in this game. Jonathan Smith's going to have his team ready to go. Oregon State's played well on both sides of the ball this season in the Pac-12. And even Florida, even with all their stars, they've been very inconsistent this season. But without Anthony Richardson and a lot of other players that are opting out for the draft, it's going to be very hard for Florida to win this game. I think they can still do it, but the losses might be too much to overcome, and I'm going to go with Oregon State to beat Florida in the Las Vegas Bowl 31-24. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Comment down below whether you think Oregon State or Florida is going to win this bowl game and why, and I'll see you next time.